Thank you, Mayuri, for that very warm and generous introduction. It's not always that one is both host and guest, and this is one of those days when I am both your host as well as your guest. And in considering me, a guest, I realized that Mayuri didn't have much of a choice there. So let me begin by wishing you all a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, members of the Executive Council of the MPIDSA, members of the media, scholars, academics, and young researchers who have gathered here today. I wish to begin by extending a very warm welcome to all of you. We are assembled here, as Mayuri mentioned, for the inaugural session of the 16th edition of the South Asia Conference being organized by the MPIDSA. And I dare say that it's not just limited to South Asia. And so therefore we have the privilege of hosting guests from nearly a dozen countries. About 18 in all have come and joined us. And we have at least another dozen speakers from around India participating in our conference. So it's something that goes beyond South Asia. And the title of the conference, ladies and gentlemen, is Sagar to Mahasagar, Strategic and Development Partnerships. And I thought I should say a few words to introduce the topic to you before the start of the conference, to set the tone, so to speak. No doubt you will be taking a much deeper dive over the rest of today and tomorrow. This conference, as you all know, has been held for many years in a row. And in 2023, we, in fact, hosted two conferences, albeit limited to South Asia. The first was in the context of India's G20 presidency, where the motto, as you all know, was One Earth, One Family, and One Future. The second one, also in 2023, focused on achieving economic integration in South Asia, which we all realize is not really at its fullest potential for whatever reasons. This year, the conference is taking place against the backdrop of momentous changes, both at the regional and international level. And in the intervening period since we last gathered in this very same hall at MPIDSA, South Asia has witnessed considerable flux. In October 2024, our neighbor Bangladesh experienced political upheaval, resulting in a change in government. Now the people of Bangladesh have given their verdict and chosen a new government through the ballot box. In neighboring Nepal too, there was political change, and elections are round the corner in March this year, very soon from now. Ladies and gentlemen, the scourge of cross-border terrorism reared its ugly head in Pahalgam in April last year, when Pakistan-sponsored terrorists killed innocent tourists, including a Nepalese national, in the meadows of Pahalgam. India mounted Operation Sindoor in retaliation, destroying their safe havens and sending an unambiguous message to terrorists and their sponsors in Pakistan. Operation Sindoor, mind you, also introduced a new normal of not making any distinction henceforth between terrorists and their supporters and sponsors. At the global level, the world is going through unprecedented churn. The rules-based international order, represented by the United Nations and its treaty-based affiliates, stands greatly weakened and rendered ineffective in dealing with the key challenges of our times, such as economic recovery, climate action, and putting a halt to the protracted conflicts in Ukraine and West Asia. Privileged powers are now jostling for preeminence outside the normative order, using power asymmetries, both economic and military, to seek unilateral advantages in the empirical space. The whole world is reeling today under the so-called reciprocal and in some cases penal tariffs imposed by the United States of America on friends and foe alike without distinction. As a result, South Asian countries too have had to deal with unprecedented uncertainties. In this regard, India has done well for itself. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has stood firm and resolute and yet engaged in pragmatic and patient negotiations. These policies, backed by India's strategic autonomy, have borne fruit in the form of a multitude of free trade agreements. India recently concluded a path-breaking trade agreement with the EU, followed by an interim trade deal with the United States. All these have come in the wake of other FTAs with the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Oman, UAE, Mauritius, as well as the EFTA grouping in Europe. Friends, the term neighborhood is not a static concept today. Globalization, however challenged, has created new and dynamic neighborhoods. Geography, though key, is no longer the sole determinant of a neighborhood. The spurt in infrastructure, connectivity, and economic cooperation that we have witnessed in recent decades has actually redefined neighborhoods. This has resulted in expanding and overlapping neighborhoods for all, not just our region. Faced with this reality, we have but two choices. The first is a situation in which shared neighborhoods become contested spaces. The second alternative is, in my view, the better one, in which shared neighborhoods create collaborative space for mutual benefit. The spectrum of choices before us along the conflict spectrum involves cooperation, collaboration, competition, conflict, and combat. Our neighborhoods should ideally remain on the cooperation and collaboration spectrum. At best, we can countenance healthy competition. Neighborhoods have ceased to be exclusive spheres of interaction, no matter which part of the world. The notion of regional and extra-regional powers is complex. Globalization, regardless of its known infirmities, has created a flatter world in recent decades. Globalization has redefined connectivity beyond the physical, beyond the geographical, to encompass trade and technology. The digital connect has made geography quite irrelevant today. Ideology, shared values, and converging interests also shape the notion of the new neighborhood, so to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indo-Pacific is a region which we all inhabit. It is at the heart of geopolitical and geoeconomic changes in the 21st century. It is a more inclusive neighborhood than the Asia-Pacific ever was, confined as the Asia-Pacific was to a few countries on the eastern seaboards of Asia. But Asia is more than just East or Southeast Asia. South Asia and the dynamic littoral nations of Africa are also part of the shifting paradigms in the Indo-Pacific. Therefore, to reject the Indo-Pacific and to cling on to archaic notions like the Asia-Pacific, in my view, is tantamount to seeking exclusivity for some and the exclusion of the vast majority of others. Besides, it is a fact that the US and European powers have contributed to peace and prosperity for decades in our region, such that the extra-regional label may not fit all of them. Friends, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has, since 2014 regarded South Asia as collaborative space in which India's civilizational ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, of the world being one family, has consistently shaped both our outlook and, more importantly, our policies. The Neighborhood First policy is one in which India seeks to assist and share its resources and capacities for the good of the region without strict reciprocity. This is reflected in the manner in which India has responded in times of crises, whether natural disasters or economic emergencies. Ladies and gentlemen, I should say that it is the broad understanding in India that neighbors would also respect certain red lines, especially not permitting their territories to be used against their neighbors for alien presence or activities that could prove detrimental to the neighbor's interests. This, in my view, includes providing any kind of refuge to radical elements, separatist outfits, terrorist networks, or even foreign powers and entities that could potentially misuse their presence. Dialogue between South Asian neighbors, or for that matter, between neighbors in our expanding neighborhood at large, is therefore very important. But equally important is dialogue and cooperation at the wider level, keeping in mind that our neighborhoods are indeed expanding. Our theme today, Sagar to Mahasagar, strategic and development partnerships, is therefore not limited to South Asia, but is related to a wider set of constituencies in the global South. Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had announced his vision of Mahasagar, that is, mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth across regions for the global South last year during his state visit to Mauritius. Exactly 11 years at that point of time, 11 years before that, he had similarly propounded his vision of security and growth for all in the region, that is Sagar, also in Mauritius. Underpinning these visions is the notion, obviously, of extended neighborhoods. Just as Sagar in Sanskrit means the sea, whereas Mahasagar alludes to the ocean, the idea of Mahasagar goes beyond Sagar. It is for us, therefore, to look at the scope and content and reach of Mahasagar. The scope of Sagar was primarily regional, focusing on South Asia and proximate IOR states. The scope of Mahasagar, however, is much wider. The reference to security and growth across regions imbues the idea with a new cachet, denoting a far more expansive and deeper scope. It suggests a framework that builds on India's outlook for the G20, essentially looking beyond the arc of the Indian Ocean region to build a community of shared values and aspirations among all developing nations of the global South. By encompassing South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the African continent, Mahasagar aims to align policies across the extended neighborhood, promoting economic prosperity through enhanced trade and strategic stability through cooperative security frameworks, indeed, for a shared future. Such a strategy, in my view, strengthens the strategic autonomy of countries of the global South in an era of geostrategic uncertainties. It helps advance our common and mutual interests at multilateral fora as well. It is relevant to note that the global South is a geopolitical concept. It has no clear geography, geographical identity or characteristics or criteria for membership. Its spread is expansive and extensive across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Both landlocked and maritime nations are part of the developing world that denotes the global South. On the economic front, Mahasagar seeks to integrate South Asia's 1.9 billion strong market with Southeast Asia's dynamic economies and Africa's resource-rich states in India's extended neighborhood. Friends, without maritime security, the sea lines of communication would be vulnerable to disruptions of the type we witnessed in the Red Sea. Enhancing maritime cooperation and security is therefore an integral part of MAHASAGAR. India, as you all know, is now an active member of some of the combined task forces in the Indian Ocean, in the Western Indian Ocean. It is also exercising with the EU in the Gulf of Guinea. At a strategic level, MAHASAGAR strengthens maritime security through initiatives like the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, IONS, which has been, in fact, led in early years by the Indian Navy, no less. The Colombo Security Conclave and the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. All these, therefore, are integral constituent elements of MAHASAGAR. The Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA, is yet another example. Information sharing is acquiring momentum under the international fusion centers, particularly the IFC IOR for the Indian Ocean region that is hosted by the Indian Navy at Gurugram in India. Ladies and gentlemen, maritime cooperation, including joint exercises and patrols, can help address threats such as illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, drugs and human trafficking, piracy, and terrorism as well. By aligning policies across this extended region, MAHASAGAR can enable countries to coordinate policies on climate resilient infrastructure, renewable energy, and disaster response, leveraging expertise for the common benefit of all. Harnessing the wealth of the oceans for collective progress is also a very important issue before us. Ocean wealth now includes deep seabed resources for critical minerals. When the International Seabed Authority, an adjunct of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, is increasingly ready to co-op partners and provide acreage for feasibility studies, it being the regulatory body in this context. Ladies and gentlemen, India is adopting a human-centric approach, whether it is digital public infrastructure, climate action, or capacity building. India's overall approach is to ensure that technological advances in cyber, space, and artificial intelligence benefit humankind. The recently concluded AI Impact Summit, hosted by India, adopted a declaration endorsed by 89 countries and international organizations, which reflects a broad-based global consensus on leveraging artificial intelligence for global growth and social good. And I do believe that unless artificial intelligence has adequate diffusion, unless we have adequate AI diffusion, the global South runs the risk of witnessing a new type of colonization in the future. It will be a digital come AI colonization for those that do not have these advanced technologies, for those that do not have adequate electricity and power for storage of data to actually retain their strategic autonomy in terms of their data as well. It also requires vast sums of money to produce ability and capacities for computing, for software, and to actually have access to GPUs. In fact, the whole of Africa may not have enough GPU capacity as perhaps just one small private player in an advanced economy. And so where is that money and technology going to be available to the rest of us as AI moves ahead with lightning speed today? Friends, the program of the two-day conference may appear ambitious, but this is in keeping with the importance of the subject matter. I am confident that the eminent speakers and panelists from South Asian nations, from Myanmar, Mauritius, Seychelles, from Tanzania, from Kenya, from many others, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan. We have all our friends here. ASEAN countries, Indonesia is also represented in this room today, and African IOR countries. All of you will share perspectives and generate new ideas that can shape new pathways for cooperation, for connectivity, and for collective growth in not just South Asia, but the broader Indian Ocean region and across the global South. Friends, expanding neighborhoods are complex, and I think my remarks by now would have suggested that complexity to you, the very many dimensions that we have too, the very notion of a neighborhood, the very notion of the Indo-Pacific. And so therefore, I would like to say once again that expanding neighborhoods are complex. They are fraught with myriad challenges. Stability requires order. Order requires sovereignty, hopefully, independence, strategic autonomy, and balance of power based on Westphalian principles of statehood. But today, we find that there are different kinds of order that are sought to be created. An order that is imposed on Westphalian structures, an order that creates a hierarchical order based on core Westphalian principles, is perhaps unacceptable. Likewise, a hierarchical order imposed through military, economic, or other means such as weaponization of soft power is unwelcome. Some powers seek to overwhelm their neighborhoods. In chaos, they find the means to dominate. Others take a more subtle path to regional domination by gradually creating monopolies and dependencies. Neither of these is necessary when there is a third choice before us. India's approach has always been to seek to work together with others as equals. In our view, in my view, problems should be resolved through peaceful negotiations, not overwhelmed. Not overwhelmed, certainly, through unilateral exercise of asymmetrical power. Projects and developmental assistance should keep in mind the priorities and sensitivities of the host countries. And I do hope, in concluding my remarks today, ladies and gentlemen, that the idea of Mahasagar will enable all of us to think on these lines and to make greater efforts and to endeavor to forge a new compact for all of us in the global South. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good day.